right. Once again, bonjour, welcome everyone. We're so glad that you came back to join us again. Tonight we want to get started telling the story of Detroit before it was known as Detroit, and recognizing this was already settled land by many nations, including the Three Fires, the people of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Wendat, the Fox, and tonight we have the very special honor of having Ogichidaakwe Mona Stonefish with us, who is, as she calls herself, an endangered species. Potawatomi of the Three Fires Confederacy and Mohawk of the Haudenosaunee. She's a grandmother that is always teaching us and keeping us in line. We're really, really grateful to have her in our community, and I just want to hand the mic to her because her words are what matter tonight. They are.
Hawojum minwamashum sananik minwanuk misnanik gahwani dashna kas kudem. Medewen duabjatun wawani wishkozian wawani we must say on mampinish nawemikan. Chimigwet janadugi minyang dashmandanabi wawani wishkozian wawani we must say on nijnish naweg minwak nuguna and manchidiate mampinongo. Chimigwet gegi minyang dashmanda wawani wishkozian, because we are a bouquet of flowers. Most beautiful people in the world. Just look around the room. But I want to tell you a story. And I want to welcome my son Walker Stonefish's nephew tonight, and my daughter-in-law's nephew, and he's from Peshawi town. And we come from the Great Lakes area, and I want to welcome David from Wikwimkong. So, and the story I'm going to talk about is we have had a society here since time immemorial. As the Three Fires people, Three Fires Confederacy, we have always been here. And I appreciate all the history that's taking place, but please remember that we had a civilization a long, long time ago, and we still have a civilization today. And I talk about being endangered species because that's exactly who we are. We're being bombarded from every area and everyone in our society today. What has happened here at Wayne State University, they said that our way is not a good way, that tobacco is how we pass tobacco. And I'm breaking the law here tonight because I'm going to hand this tobacco to these young men that are here. And if you would, we mean in Manda Sema, Wawene Wishkosian, Minwa Gewi, David. Naha. David Mampi Benaniban. And we mean in Sema, Wawene Wishkosian, Wawene we must say in Gegi Mampi Nishnabami, can Chimigwachki Biayan Mampi Nongo. Naha. So this is the first language that was spoken here in this hemisphere. And this is the language that is spoken by us still today. And it's one of the most endangered languages because we are the most endangered species in the world, and especially in this hemisphere. We have fought for water since about 500 years now. People were dredging, they were cutting the wetlands. They have been destroying this land since they arrived here, the Europeans, and we still have Eurocentrism today. And because of the policies of the universities, it has really harmed the learning of Native American people, because we have a certain way that we pray. Everybody else can pray or give a thanksgiving except us when we're going to school. What really needs to happen is we need to have indigenous education protocol, because that's exactly who we are. We must say and I say that because there's two young men, and I want to know where there's the women, our indigenous women, our Anishinaabe, and to know that it is us that we carry the water, that all life that comes into the world comes through woman, even the men must come through woman to come into the world. So we give that teaching and we stand by that. When I came in today, I was offered flowers, And that's one of the most beautiful gifts that we can be given, is flowers like this, because it represents who we are as we stand today. Many colors, many shapes, many sizes, you name it, we're all in this room. And so I give thanksgiving and gratitude to my young nephew here, who offered me the flowers today. I hail from the Three Fires Confederacy and from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, two confederacies that are still standing. As a matter of fact, the Haudenosaunee has given the American government the Constitution that comes from my people, our people, Ninwe, Ginwe. We the people, by the people, for the people. And in 1967, the Canadian government also adopted that same Constitution. And in adopting that Constitution, even in this country, they decided to put us on reservations, but the land, we belong to the land. It doesn't matter where we live or how we live, we are part of the land. The land does not belong to us, it belongs to our children in the next 7 generations to come. And we give that teaching daily. Every time we open our mouth, we talk about that, because it's so important that we talk about being kind. And sometimes people mistake kindness for weakness. By no means are we weak. We're still here in spite of everything that has happened. They've rounded us up, put us in boarding schools. They've any abuse that can be talked about, we've experienced, I've experienced. I'm still going to court about residential school and the atrocities that have happened at residential school to me. And as you notice when I walk, I have a limp. And that's from being sexually abused and being abused at residential school. And that has been going on since 1492. And we need allies. We always ask for allies. And instead of getting allies, what happens sometimes, appropriation starts happening. You're not our allies. You want to become who we are. I'm not you, and you're not me. This is our story as Native Americans. And Eurocentrics would have it that we're not as smart as they are. But let me tell you something, my friends, that we have an intelligence that's beyond the intelligence. We always had an intelligence that's beyond the intelligence that we have today. We know where we started. We know how to stay alive. You know, I see people having gardens and this kind of stuff now. We've always had that. We've always shared. We had a choice to kill the people that arrived on the shores or not. We chose not to kill them. And because our ancestors at the time chose not to kill them, we uphold the honor of our ancestors, and we continued just to move forward in a peaceful manner. Our language is the oldest in this land. And we in the Great Lakes area call ourselves the Three Fires Confederacy, still standing. And we have worked very, very hard to make sure that our children speak the language. And as we gain one, we lose something else. Like we gain the right to speak our language in the universities and in the schools. Now they take away our privilege of the way we practice our everyday lives. So it's not that, well, I'll say I'm going to talk about Eurocentrism, and I think that's what's going on. I think white is one of privilege, and they make those decisions, and they purport to make those decisions on our behalf. And I'm going to tell you tonight, and I submit to you tonight, that's not true. They can't do that to us. They can't, and never did, and never will hold us back. We're going to live the way we live. We've always lived off the land. We've always lived off the water. The first means of transportation here was a canoe. And we still cross the river, the Detroit River. We go on the Pacific Ocean, and we walk for the water, for the spirit of the water. I'm a grandmother water walker. The young men have come and carried, helped me when I couldn't walk very good, and made sure that I stood up. And the young women that walk in front of me, because I'm walking for them, have always been there to uphold the the teachings that we have. And people might say, well, oh, I can go to the store and buy a glass of water. Well, let me tell you, friends, we're walking for the water for you too. Because have you ever been thirsty? When there's no water, we'll all perish. And so I call myself an endangered species, and so are you. We can talk about many, many things. We can look at history, and history's good. But remember this, if we don't take care of those natural things, and if we don't have these boundaries within this country, we're never going to be able to survive in this country. You cannot eat money. You absolutely cannot eat money. And when you shit, it stinks. And so when I talk about Confederacy, I talk about the three major nations right here in Michigan. And that's the Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe, or some call Chippewa, but the language is actually an Anishinaabe one, but they call it Ojibwe. So, but they're actually Ojibwes. And Gijibawiwok, when we were still fighting, they had to run ahead and to make sure that everything was okay. What the Potawatomis did was, we are the fire keepers of our Confederacy. And the Odawas, they made sure that they watched the boundaries for us. And they still continue to do that. And what has happened is the government said, well, you can have these casinos. And not only are we having a challenge with those, with the money that comes in, you're having problems with it too. We have to be careful these days. We have too many drugs, too many mind changers. And in our prophecy it says that, be mindful of those mind changers. Our prisons are too full with our people. And we don't say hello to each other when we pass each other. We don't even smile at each other anymore. We walk past each other. And that's one of the greatest gifts that we have, is to smile and to look at one another and bid each other a hello. And we don't do that anymore. So we are getting farther and farther away from being human beings. And we must never forget that we are human beings. And for the longest time, we have always provided food for, in the land. We're farmers, and we're still farmers. And we've never given up that gift to be able to be a part of the land and to eat from that land. Then they brought those cows around here, which take up so much of the land. And people say, well, this is red meat, we need to eat this kind of stuff. But my friends, it's ruining our land. It has ruined the land. It takes up too much space. And it gets in our lungs. And we need to stop those things. And we need to definitely stop those corporations, the fracking that's going on, the digging for oil, and all those kinds of things. Join us. Join the Native American people in stopping these people, because we're in this together. And I trust that we'll be in for the long run. Ogichidaakwe gibi ayang mampinong wawana wishkoziang wawana we must say ang mampinishnaveamikan. Chimigwechki minyang sa kinagona mampiatemgat. Chimigwechki minyang sa wawana wishkoziang, wawana we gigdiang, wawana we jitayang ganin we mampinishnaveking. Peace be with you.
Thank you, Mona. We've got a number of speakers today, and if any of you have any pressing questions right now, we'd like to hear them so that you can direct your questions to Mona. Yes, would you stand up, please?
Hi, Mona. I wanted to ask, what makes you hopeful?
Because in our prophecies it said we must believe in ourselves and trust ourselves. So in that I have hope. And I look around the room and I see hope. And we should be having hope on our shirts as well as kindness. Miigwech.
Thank you. Stand up, please.
Hello, grandmother. I was curious if you remember your language from your early years, or if you had to relearn it or learn it after your school days.
My grandmother used to hide us from the federal agents, and they didn't take us till I was 7 years old that fall, and I turned 8 in the boarding school, and I had my language before then. So we say a child should learn everything they need to know in life by the time they're 7 years old. So I'm very grateful to my grandparents and to my people, and for the Three Fires Confederacy, that I was able to retain the language in spite of all the atrocities that happened to me.
Miigwech.
Thank you.
Peace, first off. The way that you were speaking to me, it felt like it felt very humble and very loving, almost like a plea for consideration. And I know the context of you being here is to provide critical cultural literacy. So to that point, what would be like direct statements that you would say to provide like an anchoring context for the young people from U of M, Semester in Detroit program, the community members, the folks who may be from the community but lack the cultural literacy, lack that indigenous literacy? What would be some straightforward points, like know this, interact this way, to just ground folks in the place and in the people and culture?
Thank you. My people, Ninwe, knew a long time ago that our ancestors said that they could hear your drums, my brother, from across the way. They didn't know when you were coming, but they knew you were coming. And they said once you arrived, because you didn't come on your own, that we would join hands and that we would look forward together and that other people would follow us to live the dream and to build our languages and keep the foundation strong that was already put forward for us. And that's the teaching that we have. The land is not ours, it belongs to our children and the next 7 generations ahead. Miigwech.
Bonjour, Nogmes. Vanessa is Mark Condition Cast, Michigan Dodam, and I think it's important that I introduce myself in language, but happy you're here. And I was wondering, what is your hope for your grandchildren, and what do you hope that Anishinaabe people will do in the future?
Miigwech Nojish. I want to let you know, and I stand proud in saying that my grandchildren are National Honor Society people. And I'm very proud of that. And they have this intelligence from our people, from my ancestors. It isn't something that they learned in a book or anything like that. And that's why book learning comes so easy for us. And if everyone could go to school without having to pay so much money to go to school, that's my hope, and that's what I look for the future generations. That we wouldn't have to pay so much for the education, because that belongs to us. It belongs to you. And you shouldn't have to be owing money forever and ever and can't live right and can't live in peace. Because we have to have education. We have to learn to live with each other and bring what we have to the table.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question, and then we're going to continue on, and you will have more follow-up later. Okay?
Hi. I was wondering how you'd respond to, there's a local prominent journalist who has actually spoken and argued for maybe some kids being removed from their homes and sent away to school if they live in a bad neighborhood. And she's written about it, and what would be your, based upon your experience, how would you respond to that journalist and that thought in today's society?
I would say stop stealing our children. You have no business to do that. Get the hell out of here.
And on that note, thank you so much, Mona. Appreciate your wisdom, your insight, and clearly your presence. We're going to continue. I'm going to read the introductions for our next two speakers so that maybe we can sort of flow right from one into the other, because I think they're all interrelated. David Goldberg, who's seated to my right, is assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies at Wayne State University. He co-edited and contributed to Black Power at Work, Community Control, Affirmative Action, and the Construction Industry. This is Cornell University Press, book came out in 2010. And he is finishing a book, manuscript now, called Courage Under Fire, Black Firefighters and the Struggle for Racial Equality in the FDNY, the Fire Department of New York, who you see on TV all the time, for the University of North Carolina Press. He's also in the process of doing research for his next book project, which will be a biography of General Gordon Baker, and we all are anxiously awaiting that to come out. After David speaks, we're going to have, I'm not really completely sure, depends on how we move through here, but I'm going to show a clip from the documentary, The Black Unicorn. Most of the students probably already downloaded and watched the entire thing, right? If not, you will have a preview here, just a short clip of Dudley Randall talking about growing up in Detroit, in Black Bottom and Paradise Valley in the 1930s and 40s. And then we will segue into a discussion by Orlin Jones, who is my neighbor. And Mr. Jones is a retired General Motors foreman and the president of the Conant Gardens Property Owners Association. He is a collector of historical materials on Conant Gardens and Pershing High School, wow, Mamata, as a City of Detroit historian by avocation. His efforts over the years have resulted in an effective public relations and excellent publicity and media coverage for Conant Gardeners. His collection of historical documents and photographs were included in the publication Conant Gardens, A Black Urban Community, 1925 to 1950. He is affectionately referred to as the mayor of Conant Gardens. He is also a track star, Pershing High School track star, and he and his brother were the only two brother track,
only two brother hurdle champions
in the city of Detroit. And after that, hopefully Professor Todd Duncan will be able to join us. He is also in the Department of African American Studies and in the English department at Wayne State University. His interests are American and African American literature, oral narrative, and poetry. Two of his courses are centered on Detroit, stories of old timers, and Detroit poetry. From 2001 to 2005, along with Professor Beth Bates and the late Catherine Lindbergh, he participated in the working group Unruined Voices, funded through the Wayne State University Humanities Center. He's got an amazing collection of oral histories of people who have gone on to glory, but we still have them to listen to and hear due to the important work that Todd has done in collecting those tapes. So, David, you ready? Okay.
Hello, everybody. Well, I was tasked tonight with providing a historical overview for the speakers, with giving a timeline of sorts. Kind of goes against the mission of what we're doing here today, which is letting Detroiters speak in their own words, so I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. And it's not very easy to cover a 200-year period in 10 or 15 minutes, but I'm going to give it a shot. I can't promise you anything, but here we go. I just want to go through a couple benchmark periods or events in Detroit's history to kind of tie it into the 20th century and then to get to our speakers who we have today. I started out, those of you that are in the course, I believe I sent a very extended kind of version of this timeline. I cut it down for the sake of this talk, but you should be able to have that. I think Craig sent that out to everybody before. And before I get started, I should credit my source here because I've taken this largely, the framework of it and a lot of the dates from Louis Jones, who's an archivist at Wayne State University, the Reuther Library. And he has this project online, if you're interested. I think it's called African Americans in Detroit, which includes a number of oral histories, timelines, and things of that nature. But I decided to start fairly arbitrarily when Detroit becomes a city. On the big timeline, there's a little caption before this that talks about the initial settlement and how this included not only Europeans, but a small grouping of enslaved people, both native and African. So that's kind of the origins of that intersection between the native population and the black population that starts with the city's history. I wanted to put down, I want to make sure that we got to the Erie Canal, because really the kind of changes in technology and transportation is what allowed kind of the Midwest to become the West at that time. So that's important to kind of recognize because that leads to kind of like the birth of industry and industrialization later on. And a big kind of like community building event amongst Black Detroit was the Blackburn Riot. Ruth and Thornton Blackburn came from Kentucky, escaped from slavery in 1831. And in 1833, Kentucky slave hunters came to collect their property. And what really happened at that time is the community, very small community at the time, banded together to stave them off from being taken and to shepherd them off into Canada to freedom. And as a result of this kind of this self-defense initiated by the small black community, you had the implementation of a variety of black codes. That's supposed to be 1827, not 1927. So there were restrictions placed on people that were coming to take back their property, as well as restrictions placed on black, free blacks and refugee blacks, and where they could go, curfews, pass systems imposed, and things of that nature. A big swath of time that I wanted to kind of get to, because I don't think a lot of people discuss this, is the period from that moment, the kind of community formation moment in the 1830s to about the Civil War, about the 1860s. And what you have is the development of people either manumitted or escaped that are coming north in greater numbers. So you get an influx of black population is growing, but it also starts to recede around 1850 after the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act. So you see kind of numbers of people dwindle in respect, because when people don't find safety here, a lot of people go to the free black communities in Canada. I always mention this because I always find it ironic when you drive through Ontario and you see that, the signs that say African Circle Tour. Anyone ever seen those? And you're like, what? African Circle Tour here? Well, these are these kind of free black communities that people were able to escape to in places like Sandwich and other small towns, where they're able to kind of have what some people refer to as utopian communities and be able to protect themselves from kind of slave catchers and things of that nature when they weren't getting protection from the federal government. And you see kind of the impact of this by 1860, right? Because once the kind of, that fear is gone, people start to move back in greater numbers. So the black population 10 years later doubles in Michigan, in Detroit. You also have, in 1863, you all have seen the movie Gangs of New York, right? Which is not a very good historical film, but I won't get into that another time. But we had in Detroit as well kind of a draft riot here in the same year, 1863, and for many of the same reasons. And it's a black man who's accused of raping a white woman and a black woman, and he's kind of brought into jail. If I could we hit the clip, because there's a short clip about this. It's rarely discussed, so I think it'd be good to show this. I'm sorry.
2 months after President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation and officially called to arms all African Americans, the United States Congress passed the Enrollment Act of Conscription in March 1863. This act required that all men between the ages of 20 to 45 be subject to a draft into the Union Army. The exemption clause allowed wealthy citizens to pay a $300 fee, making them exempt from the draft and discriminating against lower-class citizens who could not afford the fee. Draft riots erupted all over the United States. In Detroit, Michigan, military quotas were being filled without the need of a draft, and many feared this new federal law. Racial tensions in Detroit began to escalate as newspapers like the Detroit Free Press blamed African Americans for the war and encouraged readers to be fearful of free blacks. In addition, a Detroit tavern owner, William Faulkner, was arrested for molesting 2 9-year-old girls, Mary Brown, a white girl, and Ellen Hoover, a black girl. On March 6, 1863, a mob of whites gathered outside City Hall to hear William Faulkner's verdict of guilty. Soldiers from the federal provost garrison were called to manage the mob and transferred William Faulkner to the local jail. The mob became riotous after a soldier fired on the crowd, killing Charles Langer. The mob attacked Faulkner while in transit and invaded Detroit's black neighborhood centered on Beaubien Street south of Lafayette. 30 homes were destroyed, more than 200 blacks were left homeless, several died and dozens were seriously injured. Joshua Boyd, a black man, was struck in the head with an axe while trying to escape from a burning building. The 27th Michigan Infantry Regiment dispersed the riot and arrested 22 people. Although racial animosity was already present in Detroit, the Free Press further instigated the prejudice towards African Americans by publishing openly racist articles. Prior to the riot, the Free Press made hints at the possibility of a riot ensuing and used the case of William Faulkner as a catalyst. The newspaper states, "It is thought that an excited and indignant mob would have attempted to wreak summary vengeance upon him within the very walls of the courtroom." Competing Republican newspaper, the Detroit Advertiser and Tribune, exclaimed, "This is a Free Press mob," citing the Free Press as the cause of the riots. The Detroit Free Press newspaper labeled March 6th as the bloodiest day that ever dawned on Detroit. In the coming years, both girls confessed that they lied on the stand against William Faulkner, and in 1870 he was pardoned after serving 7 years in prison.
Not your Free Press.
I just wanted to show that clip because so oftentimes when people discuss Detroit and riots, they use the term riots, right? That's not one you oftentimes hear about, right? In the rich history of race riots in Detroit, this is the first of several. We'll get to the latter version 1943 as we kind of move through the timeline here. After the Civil War, you have kind of a period in which black people are trying to assert what Hassan Jeffries is referred to as the freedom rights. You see kind of a group of black elite Republicans really coming to bear on the political scene, gaining office, and then also trying to break different barriers that are being imposed upon black citizens. One example is 1869, getting blacks fully vested in the Detroit public school system. You have people in the turn of the century who are fighting against kind of public segregation laws, and we have that early on the books, even though segregation still remains in the de facto form after that. So you have a small group of people, including the people that were associated with Detroit's first black newspaper, the Plain Dealer, right? Attorneys and people that went on to serve in the legislature and in various different public offices at the turn of the century. But the big kind of turn, of course, is industrialization and the advent of the automobile industry, which happens around the turn of the century. I think it's 1899, Old starts the first factory, right? And you get the smattering growth and development of auto. But one of the things that isn't often talked about is how few black people got in on the front end of the automobile industry. Very few people would hire black people. When they did, it was largely in janitorial work. So they weren't in production at all. And this starts to take a turn in large numbers around World War I and the Great Migration. Right, so the big statistic here is that from 1916 to 1918, in the heart of kind of the largest migration during the first Great Migration, you had an influx of estimated 25,000 to 30,000 migrants in a 2-year period. And before that, in 1914, you had 1,000 blacks working in auto, but estimated 12 to 18 at different points from 1916 to 1918. And again, that continued to be in very segmented aspects of production, and that starts to change in 1919 when Henry Ford really starts to employ black people in large numbers, particularly in foundry work, but also in other areas of the factory. He really does put people in all different aspects of the factory, largely, I think, to prevent kind of organizing in different areas. But he was a path-breaking force in that regard, because so few people hired any black people, and he was willing to put people in production spots and skilled trades positions back then. So in the early stages of Rouge, you had 25.9% of the workers at Ford Rouge were black. And that accounted for 27% of all black men in Detroit who had jobs at the time. So when people talk about Mr. Ford, this is the significance, right? It was the economic backbone of this burgeoning kind of a black community that's forming during the Great Migration. The huge growth, 611% of the black population from 1910 to 1920 sparked backlash. If any of you are familiar with Kevin Boyle's book or Beth Base's book, on this period, they're wonderful. I don't have time to go through it in great detail, but it really sparks the rise of the urban clan. Detroit had among the largest chapters in the nation, here and in Indiana as well. And at that time, of course, Ocean Sweet, whose house is on Garland and Charlevoix, he moved into that neighborhood, an all-white neighborhood, and came under mob attack and protected himself, he and his family members and friends. And wound up going to court. You can read Arc of Justice if you want to get the full story on that. But the part that I like to emphasize, because Boyle doesn't mention this, I don't think, of the book, is that he talks about how there's a gentleman, Charles Bowles, who was a Klan member, and how they used to have rallies on 8 Mile at City Hall that would be anywhere from 10 to 15,000 deep. Like, that's how popular the Klan was at the time. But what he doesn't mention is that after 1925, Bowles had run for mayor in 1925, and they say he lost because he was a write-in candidate, much like Mike Duggan. You make the parallels yourself here, but and much like Mike Duggan, a lot of people misspelled his name. However, back then they didn't count those votes. This time they did. So they said that those votes that were discounted cost him the election. But what isn't noted in that book is that he later ascends to the mayor's office in 1929. Right, he doesn't last very long because he's quite corrupt, and his clan ties kind of come back to him, and he's ultimately replaced by Frank Murphy. But I think it's important to note that that gentleman did become the mayor of Detroit. And then you, of course, have the Great Depression, and I think this is, I wanted to end here because hopefully Todd will come here. But Todd was going to speak about a gentleman who was an auto worker and was one of the first skilled workers at the River Rouge plant. His name is Quill Petway. And Mr. Petway grew up in the Brewster projects, which came into fruition in the 1930s. And he boxed with Joe Louis. And he was engaged in the recreation center there and was a member of the Brewster Old Timers much later in his life. But did you want to?
Well, I guess what we should do is then we could show the clip from the Dudley Randall, because he's going to cover this period growing up in Detroit in the 1920s and 30s, and that takes us all the way up to the 1943 ride. And if Todd still is not here, then we'll segue right into Mr. Jones's presentation on Kona Gardens. Okay? Are we ready?
Thank you. So I'm here with the rest of you to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Broadside Press, and in person to greet the Poet Laureate of the city of Detroit. Well, this is your 10th anniversary. It was in 1980. I remember too. That I first declared you Detroit's first and only Poet Laureate. And you are that today. Long before you were Poet Laureate, you served the city. And since you've become it, you've continued to serve the city. We are honored by your massive efforts to preserve and publish black artists when they could not be preserved or published in any other place. Your contributions and the contributions of Broadside Press are well known. I want to thank the best for what they've done to carry on that tradition. Detroit is a unique place. Its people make it unique. And it's people like Dudley Randall and the best which make it unique.
I came to Detroit on New Year's Day, 1920. I remember the date because when the train pulled into the station and we got off, you could hear the bells ringing, the whistles blowing. It was New Year's. I remember standing by the big locomotive. The wheels were just about as tall as I was. And that was in January 1st. And my birthday was January 14th. So I arrived here when I was almost 6. My father was a minister, that was his vocation, but he didn't always work as a minister. He came to Detroit from a job in East St. Louis as a YMCA secretary. I think he hoped to get a job with the Ford Motor Company because there were a lot of blacks coming up north to Detroit and getting jobs there in personnel. But he didn't get the job. So he worked first as a salesman. And being a preacher and able to talk, he was a pretty good salesman. He worked for Absecure Company. We lived near Hastings Street later on when we bought a house and moved to Maple and Russell, about 3 or 4 blocks below the Eastern Market. But mostly in my childhood, I remember being a Boy Scout. That was a big thing in my life. I had 2 older brothers, they were Boy Scouts. And we'd go to camp in the summer, and we would drill in the streets. This troop was Troop 238. It was sponsored by Plymouth Congregational Church, the Church of Reverend Hood now. But at that time, it was a little church on Antietam Street near St. Albans. And there was Reverend Brooks and Reverend Lavis Count. Then after Reverend Lavis Count, there was Horace White, the famous labor union supporter, preacher. And he was succeeded by Reverend Hood. We'd go camping every summer in Vandalia, Michigan. That's in southwestern Michigan, where there were many black farmers, runaway slaves settled in southwestern Michigan near Cassopolis. And there were Quakers living there. There was an underground railroad station in that area. And that's where you find black farmers in southwestern Michigan. And they've lived there since before the Civil War. I was reading poetry from an early age because we had it at home. My mother was a school teacher, my father was a preacher, and the house was always full of books. I remember the books that we had. I can remember them not only for the contents, but for the surface, the color and feel of the books. My father had a 2-volume edition of Browning's lyrics in white covers, trimmed with gold, and he had a cowhide bound volume of Tennyson's complete poems. And my mother resented that book because it was given to him by his girlfriend when he was in college. But those were books, I like the feel of the books, the heft of the books. My mother had a book called Favorite Poems, and a lot of the poems in that book were my favorites because a child doesn't have a good taste in poetry. Just as children would go to movies now and like horror pictures, I would like poems in that book, favorite poems like Longfellow's The Skeleton in the Armor, and Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and The Wreck of the Hesperus, and A Biggin on the Rhine, There's a German Soldier Dying. It's all very sentimental and scary and not very good poetry, but that's what a kid likes. You develop your taste, you go up from Edgar Allan Poe and Longfellow to better poets. At Duffield, Miss Poindexter called me reading Macbeth in class. And that was something I wasn't supposed to do. And I just like poetry. And then when we moved to a house on Russell, I guess I was about 9 years old and I started writing poetry to influence a girl who lived upstairs, Willie May. And it was still while we lived in that house on Russell, that was where I really grew up. Became 21 in that house. We were buying it, and we lost it during the Depression. It was a fairly big house, 11 rooms. And I would sit on the roof of the porch underneath the shade of a tree of heaven, and read poetry, Keats and Shelley. It was while I was living in that house that I finally decided to be a poet. I definitely made up my mind I'd be a poet. I was 13 years old. I was attending Eastern High School at that time, and I earned my first money by a single poem to the Detroit Free Press. They had a young people section every Sunday, and there was a poet's page. And there was one poem, which was a prize poem, every week. You could win a prize of $1. And that's the way I earned my first money writing poetry. The first poem I sent to the page was a sonnet on one of these icy mornings when the trees are covered with ice and they glitter in the street lights. I wrote a sonnet, and it won the prize of $1, which was big back in 1930. I used to deliver papers, and at that time the Sunday papers came out on Saturday night, and I would pick up my papers where the truck would throw them on the corner, and I would go to St. Joe's Catholic school and sit down on one of the windows and reach in the Sunday paper to see whether my poem had been published. During the Harlem Renaissance, the crisis and opportunity were very good outlets for black poets. But in 1937, I sent a poem, Hastings Street Girls, to Opportunity, and the editor accepted it. But then Opportunity ceased publishing, and the editor sent the poem back. And it was not until I put out a book in 1971 that poem was published. That was about 40 years later. And the poems that were published in the 60s had been written maybe in the 40s. George, when I was a boy desiring the title of man and toiling to earn it in the inferno of the foundry knockout, I watched and admired you working by my side as goggled with mask on your mouth and shoulders bright with sweat. You mastered the monstrous, lumpish cylinder blocks. And when they clotted the line and plunged to the floor with force enough to tear your foot in two, you calmly stepped aside. One day, when the line broke down and the blocks reared up, groaning, grinding, and mounted like an ocean wave, and then rushed thundering down like an avalanche, and we frantically dodged, then braced our heads together to form an arch to lift and stack them. You gave me your highest accolade. You said, "You're not afraid of sweat. You're strong as a mule." And now, here, in the hospital, in a ward where old men wait to die, you sit and watch time go by. You cannot read the books I bring, not even those that are only picture books, as you sit among the senile wrecks, the psychopaths, the incontinent. One day, when you fell from your chair and stared at the air with a look of fright which sight of death inspires, I lifted you like a cylinder block and said, "Don't be afraid of a little fall, for you'll be here a long time yet, because you're strong as a mule." In 1929, there came the big crash, and we were still living on Macon Russell during the Depression. Everybody was out of work. But in a way, that was a happy time when you look back, because folks were more together then. There were no robberies because there was nothing to rob. You could leave your door unlocked. I don't remember locking our front door. And you could visit your neighbors, you sat on the porch, you knew everybody passing down the street. My brother got a job cleaning up a sermon radio company, and he was able to buy a radio. And it was sometime during the 30s we got our first radio. People would go to other people's houses and listen to the radio or to the ball game. And they listened to Joe Lewis's fights too. And he would say, "Mom, I'm glad I win. Hello, Mom, I'm glad I win." And then after the fight, everybody would rush out in the street, go up and down Russell Street and on Hastings and Adams. The cars would be parading through the streets, and people would make confetti out of rolls of toilet paper, throw confetti in the street. It was a big celebration. They had a little restaurant downtown, they called it the Penny Kitchen on Monroe. You could get a dish, say, for a penny or 2 cents or 3 cents. Maybe a meal would cost about 9 or 10 cents. But then there was evidence of being black. My brother and I were downtown, and we wanted to get some food, so we went in this penny kitchen. And the proprietor said, "We'll serve you, but you'll have to eat in the kitchen." And my brother said, "This is the cheapest damn place in town. You want us to eat in the kitchen?" So we walked out, we didn't eat. It started Sunday around Belle Isle and around the Naval Armory on Jefferson at the foot of the bridge to Belle Isle. Monday morning, I didn't know anything about what happened Sunday. Monday morning, when I was delivering mail, I lived in a Polish neighborhood. A woman in a lunch stand told me there had been fighting, but I didn't know anything about it. It was peaceful on my route. But when I got back to the office and the mailman came in for lunch, they came in with tales of Hastings Street being littered with glass, and people breaking windows and looting. The inspectors came to the station during lunchtime, and the men were assigned to different routes. I was assigned to a route in a black neighborhood, and I think I went on Hastings. And I saw that the Hastings was covered with glass, and I went into the store where the windows were broken out. I think it was a jewelry store. And when I went in with the mail, there were some cops inside, and they raised their guns and said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want to get out." But no, I didn't really say that. That's what I should have said. I said I'm delivering the mail. So they took the mail and didn't buy it. And the mailman came in with different tales. At that time, the United States government was respected. One white man in a black neighborhood said people followed him that he had given checks to and had taken care of their mail. They followed him around and said, "We're not going to let anybody bother you." Later on, I went to my regular route, which was in a Polish neighborhood. Nothing happened to me. I heard kids on the porch. One kid said, "What is he doing in our neighborhood?" And another kid said, "Well, he's the mailman. He has just much right to be here as anybody else." So I took the streetcar home, and when we got on Oakland, people started stoning the streetcar. So people pulled down the shades to protect themselves from the bricks and the rocks and the concrete. I got out of the car on the corner of Oakland and Holbrook, or Claremont. And I watched the people in the crowd. They would stone the motorists as they went by. If there were whites in the car, they would stone the car. And blacks in the car would put a white handkerchief on their car. And I went home, and everybody had a story to tell. There was a man who had just come to Detroit from the South. I was living with a young couple from Lincoln University in Missouri. And this was a friend of theirs from the South. But when he was coming to their house on the Woodland Avenue streetcar, they had stoned the streetcar, and they were dragging blacks out of the streetcars and beating them. And the instructor told him to hide in the seats so the mob wouldn't get him. So he got to our house safely. But he was so scared of the violence of the North that he said he was going right back down south where he could be safe. And there had been racial tension in Detroit. There was a lot of work in Detroit in the plants. And there was pressure to upgrade blacks, and there was resistance on the part of whites. In spite of the good work of the UAW, the UAW was a liberal union. But there were whites who resented blacks being hired and blacks being upgraded. There was also tension about housing. A few months before, there had been a riot at the Sojourner Truth Project when black tenants attempted to live there. My personal feeling was that, and this is the same way today, a person is just a person. I look on people as individuals, and if they're good individuals, I like them. If they're bad individuals, I don't like them. I think it was the philosophy of my parents. We grew up reading books. We read books written by writers of every nation. We knew that there are good people in every country and good people of every race, and bad people in every race, and bad people in every nation. So we were always taught Not so much by precept as by example, that people were just people. I think after the riot, they stepped up to drafting a young black man. It wasn't like the Vietnam War. We felt we were fighting for something. We were fighting against Hitler, we were fighting against fascism, we were fighting against the people that had launched the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. And people were patriotic then. Nobody objected to the war, except the German Americans. They put the Japanese Americans in concentration camps, but not the Germans. Even the Germans that objected to the war. But when I went into the army, I looked on it as an adventure.
Okay, we're gonna stop there so we can entertain our guests. Yes, Mr. Jones, would you come forward? It's a good place for you to pick up and talk about Kona Gardens. Some of the things that Mr. Jones is going to talk to you is also going to see some echoes with what Dr. Randall talked about here.
I think I need somebody else to click.
The clicker? Okay, can you, want you to do the operating room. You understand it, Mr. Jones, can see you.
Okay, hello folks, my name is Orlin Jones. I was born and raised in the city of Detroit, living in the greatest neighborhood in the world, Kona Gardens. And naturally, I've been to every city in the world. But believe me folks, I lived in the greatest neighborhood in the world, but it's not that now anymore. It's still there, but it's probably on its way. I'll be 84 years old in September, and I'm gonna stay there. I ain't going nowhere. I'm staying. So my buddy said, "Hey Jones, you still live in Kona? You still live in the old neighborhood?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What the hell are you waiting for?" I said, "I'm waiting for you to pay me that $400 so your water bill wouldn't, so your gas wouldn't be cut off in Palmer Woods." This is Norwood Street in Kona Gardens, and all these homes here were built in the 40s, and our book goes from 1920 to 1950. Okay. Wait.
Hold it close, the mic close.
Okay. How am I going to tell somebody to click it? I can't. I got the pointer and
You said put the mic closer to you.
Okay. This is Norwood Street in Kona Gardens. This is Mr. Lloyd Cofer's house. This is Mr. Stewart Lloyd Cofer, who became a assistant to Dr. Wortham, the president of Michigan State. Mr. Stewart was a mailman. This is Mr. Julian Bass's house, who became the director of the Detroit Public School Payroll Division. His father owned a restaurant on Conan in Nevada. He stayed there 43 years and was never robbed. Okay. This is our mission here. The Kona Gardens mission is to preserve the history and heritage of Kona Gardens, one of Detroit's oldest and proudest black neighborhoods. These are the people that we started out with 25 and we ended up with 8. Go ahead and click it. This is Kona Shoe Barrel. So there's an argument that the Kona Gardens neighborhood was named in honor of him. Conant Avenue in the city of Detroit is named after him, and he's one of the heroes for the black people. He was an abolitionist, and he owned a lot of property in the city of Detroit, over 10,000 acres. And the acres of land that were in our neighborhood, he got rid of the restricted covenant. And so our neighborhood was one of the first, was not the first, but one of the first neighborhoods in the city of Detroit where blacks didn't have to move into somebody else's house that was previously occupied. We built our own homes. Okay. This is the population of Negro population in 1850. It was 587. The population of Detroit in 1850 was 21,000. So, like the fellow said before me, the Ford Motor Company was responsible for this big jump in the population of Negroes coming to Detroit. Okay. Okay, this is a map of the 7 black neighborhoods in Detroit. Black Bottom, Paradise Valley, the West Side, 8 Mile in Wyoming, the North End, Davidson, Dequindre, and my neighborhood, Kona Gardens. I was taking a survey. I'll be 84 years old in September, And there are 65 guys that I went to elementary school with and Persian high school. They have died. So I guess the Lord, I hope He spares me to be 100, because I got a lot more things I want to do there. Okay. This is a picture. This is one of my historical pictures. This is Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt breaking ground for the Brewster projects in 1935, Labor Day weekend. This picture was given to me by Bud Manning. The Manning brothers were professional photographers here in the city of Detroit for a number of years. Then he moved to Highland Park, then he moved to Madison Heights, then he moved back to Detroit. And he sold his photography business to Mr. Chuck Forbes. Mr. Chuck Forbes is the fellow who owned the Fox Theater and sold it to Mike Illich. This, one of the stories about this is that, see this person right here? It looks like an animal, doesn't it? That's a guy climbing on top of a frame house. Clarence Williams, who was a big numbers man in this area, well, he stated that these bulldozers put 3-4 houses together, and when Mrs. Roosevelt dropped her handkerchief, well, the tow truck pulled the houses forward. That's what Clarence said. That's the first time I'd ever heard that version, but I heard 20 other versions. This paper was supposed to be in the News Times or Free Press, but it was never one. If these people are still living, and you can see their age now, they got to be in 100. Got to be 100 years old or more. Okay, this is this lady's married name is Thomas. Joe Lewis's oldest sister, Wilma Davis. This is her daughter, Lily Mae. I never met her. I've talked on the telephone several times. She's a graduate of Miller High School. This was taken at the Paradise Theater on Woodward and Parsons, which is now the Detroit Symphony. And this is, I think this picture is in 1941 or 42 when Paradise Theater opened up with Duke Ellington. And she says, Orlin, she says, you know, every time I see one of these pictures of me, it's all over, and they use this photo here on photographs of a lot of ticket stubs. He said, I should be getting some money from somewhere. So I said, well, I don't know. I've never met her. I've been talking to her for about 10 years. I've never met her yet. Okay. This is the original Kona Gardens right here. 7 Mile Road on the north, Ryan Road on the east, 6 Mile Road on the south, and Joseph Compton on the west. Now, the Caucasian people and black people that live to 6 Mile Road, we're talking about going south to 6 Mile Road where Buddy's Pizza is. Well, the black people and the white people didn't want to be a part of Kona Gardens, so we dropped the area down here. Kona Gardens is 640 acres of land, bounded on the north by 7 Mile Road, east by Ryan Road, south by Nevada, and Conant Avenue on the west. Now, 640 acres of land, and Pershing High School takes up 19 acres of that land. Pershing High School, luckily, is in the neighborhood of Kona Gardens. Okay? This is Ocean Suite. You heard the fellow talk before me. This is the most famous address in the world at that time in 1925. 2905 Garland and Charlevoix. Ocean Suite. You all know the problem. You all know the story about that. Okay? Our book runs from 1925 to 1950. This is Woodward Avenue. This is one of my Xerox copies of the historical pictures I have of Detroit. All the way down here where that red button is, that's Fox Theater. This is a Soldiers Monument, which has moved over a little bit, and you all know what's there now. Tell me. What do you do there, recreation-wise? All right, okay. Wayne State University. Okay. Okay, go ahead. This is Pershing High School's first graduation class. There were 16 graduates in the first graduation class on a Wednesday morning, June 17, 1931. This fellow right here, his name is Fred Morrison. He became the imperial potentate of all the Shriners of the United States of America. He owns a company called Morrison Carbonic Company. It's on Evergreen as you're going south on Evergreen before you get to the big overpass that goes about 3 stories high. I met him years ago. He used to deliver, there was a black drugstore in the neighborhood of Kona Garden called Wisdom's, and he used to deliver, the carbonic there for distribution of soda pop and so forth and so on. This lady right here is Dolly Bill Thompson. She went to Highland Park High School. And then when Pershing High School opened up, she moved on Binder Street, and she only had to walk 2 blocks to school. Most of the Caucasians here lived around the Davison area. Say, for instance, if you're on Davison and Conant Avenue, this is the area they lived in, and they caught the Baker streetcar and went to Northeastern High School, so they weren't about to walk in that cold weather to Pershing High School, which had been about a mile or more. So this lady right here, I was 12 years old before I found out that she was not my real aunt. And she married my aunt's, let me get this right. She was married to Walter Thompson, whose wife was my aunt, Asa May. And this graduation exercise was held in a library at Pershing High School. Okay. This is Clarence Davenport. I'll tell you an interesting story about this guy here. Years ago, I used to have a truck, and I used to pick up, clean up garages and basements and everything. And I went over on Kercheval and Gray Street. I rung the doorbell, and a Caucasian woman came to the door. I know I looked like crazy, but I didn't know white people still lived over there in the 70s. So anyway, she says, "Are you Orlin Jones?" I said, "Yes, I am." So she says, "Come on around here. I'm going to show you what I want you to do." So she had a pile over here and a pile over there. She said, "All this stuff with the blue tape on it, you can have it." And so I said, "Well, give me $30." So she gave me $30, and I took this stuff home. And it was about a month before I even went through it. And so when I went through all this rubble that was in these cardboard boxes, well, I discovered this May class of 1934 Pershing High School yearbook. And I started going through this book, and this guy was on the Forensics Club, the Chem Physics Club, all that. I said, "Who the heck is this guy?" So I did like an Alex Haley thing on him. And so, a long story short, I come to find out that he is Clarence Davenport. He is the first African American from the city of Detroit and state of Michigan to graduate from West Point. So when the storm hit the city of Detroit in 1997, remember when we used to have the, down there by the Fishy Theater, what do we call that? Where the restaurants come, the Taste Fest. Okay, well, he came to town to see about his sister because if you remember, the Taste Fest was almost called off because of the storm. So his sister was living in Highland Park on LaBelle Street, and that's where some of the storm tore her roof off the house. And he came here to see about his sister, and he didn't know that she was in such bad shape, so he had to put her in a nursing home. So I had dinner with him a couple of days later at the St. Regis Hotel. Man, you talking about a story. I felt like Alex Haley and everybody else. The second African American to graduate from West Point is a guy named Clifford Worthy. He is the father of Wayne County prosecutor Kim Worthy. And guess what high school he went to? A black guy went to Hamtramck High School, graduated in 1944. You didn't know that, did you? A black guy went to predominantly Polish school, graduated from West Point. Kim Worthy's father. Okay. This is the Olympic game, Pershing High School and Olympic Games in our neighborhood connection. Jesse Owens, Mr. and Mrs. Jesse Owens lived in Kona Gardens for approximately 12 years. Their oldest daughter, Gloria, graduated from Pershing High School in June of 1949. And when the Olympic Games were held in Los Angeles, California, Gloria's daughter, Gina, carried the flag from the streets of Los Angeles to open the Olympic Games in 1984. Our Olympic gold medalists, Spencer Haywood, Stephen McCory, Darnell Hall, and Steve Smith. Now, this fellow, Stephen McCory, you're old enough to remember when Ponderosa Steakhouse used to be on Jail Hudson Drive out of Northland. Well, Stephen McCory walked in and I went over and introduced myself to him. And I congratulated him and everything. He's got a brother named Milton McCory, who I slightly know. He's taken over the Cronk Recreation from Emmanuel Stewart. And I introduced myself to Stephen McCory before he got his meal. And I told him, I said, "I'm going to tell you a story that you're not aware of." And he said, "What's that?" And so I said, "The young lady that carried the torch into the Olympic Stadium into the Coliseum in Los Angeles in the 1984 Olympic Games. Her mother is a Persian grad. He said, the lady who carried the torch into the Olympic Stadium went to Persian? I said, no. I said, her mother went to Persian. So he never did get it right. He went and told everybody in the city of Troy, these guys are calling Jones, you big liar, you, so forth and so on. So anyway, that's the way the story went, so I had to correct them all. Those guys knew I was telling the truth, but they were just razzing me about it. One of the interesting things about, and some of the fellows in my age group really got mad at me, we really didn't know Mr. Jesse Owens. He was working as a public relations person for the Ford Motor Company, and he was never around. I only, in the 12 or 14 years that they lived in the neighborhood, I only saw him twice. I was their paper boy. I delivered the Michigan Chronicle, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Crisis magazine to his house every Thursday. I never saw him. So the guy said, why you keep telling people that we didn't know Jesse Owens? I said, well, it's the truth. We never did know him. We didn't know him that well. So anyway, I've been a track and field fan ever since I was 12 years old. And if some of you track and field fans remember, in connection with the Detroit News and the University of Michigan, and the athletic director, Don Canham, they used to have the NCAA track and field championship at the Cobo Hall for a number of years. Then they went out to the Silver Dome. So I don't know, maybe it was probably sometime in the 60s. Well, I was standing in the lobby waiting for my buddy, and this woman came up to me. And my nickname is Brother. And so this woman came up to me, she said, hello, brother. And I looked at her, I didn't know who she was. She said, Mrs. Owens. I said, my goodness. Well, I walked, I said, after all those years, I hadn't seen her. And so when I delivered the Pittsburgh Courier and the Michigan Chronicle, especially in the wintertime, I always made her my last customer because she always had a homemade soup made for me. Mrs. Ruth Owens. Okay.
For the young people, tell us who Jesse Owens was.
Jesse Owens was a gold medalist in the 1936 Olympic Games held in Berlin, Germany. And he lived in Detroit for about 12, 14 years. When the picture, matter of fact, I talked to Gloria, his oldest daughter, who graduated from Persia in 1949, lives in Chicago. She's a former administrator for the school board, and her husband, Malcolm, used to be a Big Ten basketball official. He's a retired principal from the Chicago school system. And she says, Orlin, you be sure and go see this picture race, because that's a life story about her father, you know. So anyway, Beverly and Marlene were in Los Angeles for the opening of the race, and Gloria didn't go because she's got some medical problems with both of her knees. But anyway, the Owens family was a big part of the Kona Gardens. You want me to stop? Okay, 5 more minutes. Okay, click. This is Derek out homemaker. See this lady right here? That's Mrs. Ella Mae Goodman. Lived to be 104. The lady right there lived on the same block, but lived to be 99. This lady right here, her name is Jeffy Williams. Her son played the part of Commander Sturgis Turner on the picture, on the TV adaptation of the fighter pilot picture. What's the name of that?
Tuskegee.
No, not the Tuskegee. Oh, shucks.
Red Test?
No, it was, he played the part of Commander Sturgis Turner. Oh my goodness. Well, anyway, her grandson, her grandson is Scott Lawrence Williams. He did a lot of commercials for the United States Post Office for many years. And he played the part of Commander Sturgis Turner on this fighter pilot program that came on TV. Okay, this is Dr. Julian Bass, who was the director of public payroll department for the city of Detroit. All these kids lived in Kona Garden. Okay. This is a music class by Mrs. Gladys Wade Dillard. You jazz fans, that's Tommy Flanagan, the jazz pianist who played with Ella Fitzgerald. I know everybody in this picture but this guy here. I don't know who this guy is. I don't know who he is. All these young ladies graduated from Pershing High School. Okay. This is Mrs. Gladys Wade Dillard, born in Vancouver, Canada. This is Vera Kemp. She's 93 years old. She's totally blind right now. Okay. This is Mrs. Vivian Nash. I call her Detroit's Madam C.J. Walker, who owned her own cosmetology school. Okay. This is a cosmetology school on Forest and Hastings in the 1940s. She had a heck of a mail order. And I was her paper boy for many years. Some of you that are here are old enough to know when they had those white copper pennies. Nobody remembers that? Okay, well anyway, she never let me in the house. She always counted my pennies out. 15 cents, 15 cents. And so I started delivering. I didn't give her the 2 papers at once. I give her 1 paper one day and come back another. I wasn't going to stand out there in the rain and the cold for her to count on 30 pennies. But anyway, this building was on Forest and Hastings. Okay. Okay, this is Mr. Curtis Hardy from Biloxi, Mississippi, Detroit's second black milkman. He had 5 kids that went to Pershing High School. Okay. This is the Stallings Texaco station. This might be the first and only black-owned Texaco station in the city of Detroit. And this is Edsel Stallings, who became Assistant Secretary of State under Richard Austin, Herman, Lonnie Sr., Lonnie Jr., and Lonnie Sr. They're all dead now. This building is still standing. Okay. This is our black Rosie the Rivers here in Detroit. This is Mrs. Cabot, Mrs. Chapman, Mrs. Gunby, Mrs. Mosley. I deliver newspapers, all that. When you're on the east side of Detroit and you're on the East Nevada and Ryan Road, that dilapidated building right next to Coney Island, that's where they made aeronautical products. They made 17 cents per hour. Okay. This is Mr. Harrison Campbell. He looks Caucasian, but he's not. He's black. He is the granddaughter of Lauren Campbell Sanders, the girl who used to give the news on Channel 4 that's married to Heisman Trophy winner Barry Sanders. Okay. This is Mr. Robinson, who lived 2 doors from me on Wexford Street. This car is facing north. It's on Hastings Street. Okay, say you're driving down I-75 going south, and you come up to Warren Avenue. You got Bethel AME Church, Warren Avenue, and Plymouth Congregational Church. Plymouth Congregational Church is right here. This pillar here belongs to St. Joseph at Church. Remember here a couple of years ago, that the people of St. Joseph wanted some donations to repair their dome? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now when you're coming down I-75 and you come up to Warren, you're on I-75 Service Drive, and you come to the corner here, and that's 691 Canfield, St. Joseph at Church. Okay. This is a protest sign when black people tried to move in the Sojourner Truth Project on, they tried to move in on Saturday morning, February 28, 1942. Okay. But these homes here are still standing here. There used to be a mobile station right here on the corner. These policemen are facing the west, and going right here is north. That's Pershing High School. That's when African Americans tried to move across Ryan Road and move into Sojourner Truth Projects, but it didn't work. Okay. This is Detroit's first strip mall, East 7 Mile in Kona, 1939. I worked in personnel office at the General Motors plant for 2 years. I worked in personnel, and my boss, he knew that I knew something about Pershing High School, the shopping center there. His mother used to own the Mary Ann shop there, and he gave me this picture. Jim Heisner. Okay. This is the neighborhood's first Girl Scout troop. That's Gloria Owens. That's Jesse Owens' oldest daughter. That's my sister, Barbara, and this is Janet Bell, and that's her mother. There are 10 people in this picture. 3 of them are dead, and all the rest are living. Okay. This is Marjorie Day. This is Buddy Benson's red convertible car. He was a talk of the neighborhood. He's now deceased. Okay. This is this lady here, and these 2 ladies here. They're both in their 90s, and they've been exchanging birthday cards ever since they were 10 years old. That's my uncle there. My mother wanted her brother to marry Irma so bad, but it's a long story. Okay. Okay, this is Harry S. Truman. This is the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This is Mr. William Booker, who's a real estate agent. He now has a granddaughter who's on the city council in Louisville, Kentucky. He has a granddaughter that's on the city council in New York City. You want me to stop?
Yeah, we're going to have time for questions. As you can see, Mr. Jones is a wealth of knowledge and history. Don't go too far though. We have some flyers of For the students, don't take any of the flyers, okay? Because they're gonna be scanned and uploaded to C-Tools, but for the community people, please come and take some of the flyers that are from Mr. Jones' book, and also there is information on how you can actually buy the book. I just wanted to add to $35. That many of the photos that I used in the documentary film Dudley Randall, I was able to get from Mr. Jones. When I was doing my research and I would go into the Detroit Public Library, the microfilm was so bad, I said, I can't use this. Mr. Jones said, well, come and look at my stuff. And so all of those stills from the 43 riot, I was able to give him, and he had that photograph of Mr. Randall when he was in the Boy Scouts. You know, I was like, wow. So, David, you want to come up, please?
I want to ask you a question. Do you have books here for sale?
Yes, sir, I got 4 of them, $35.
That's the first thing. And the second thing, could you talk a little bit about resistance of black homeowners to the Sojourner Truth Project prior to 1942 as a class dynamic?
Well, on Saturday, February the 28th, 1942, that's when African Americans tried to move into the Sojourner Truth Project, and they were stopped right there at Ryan Road. Okay, there was a real estate man named Mr. Buffer, B-U-F-F-A, whose home is still on Finland Street. Well, he was a real estate investor, and he didn't want African Americans moving into the neighborhood because he owned just about every house over there in that neighborhood. He didn't want black people moving over there. Now, like I said before, this third time I said, I'm 84 years old. I still get teased about, oh, you lived in a house with lace curtains in there. You had lace tablecloth and all this and that. Your mother and father had good jobs and all that. Well, you know, that wasn't my fault. You know, so some of my best friends lived in Sojourner Truth Project because I delivered the Michigan Farmer in Pittsburgh Courier in the Crisis magazine over there. And I got friends. I was the only guy, almost literally, could go there without getting jumped on. Because I knew everybody that delivered the paper. One of the things I like for you to do is come to that last picture, then I'll be. Okay. Come to the last picture. Keep going until you come to the last picture. Okay, right there. Okay, this is the this is the historical marker in our neighborhood on the corner of Kona and East Nevada. That's Clyde Hopkins, my first cousin. He's the one that started this project. Clyde was an appointee of Mayor Coleman Alexander Young. One of the biggest jobs he had as director of the city engineering. He was in charge of the renovation of the Belle Isle Bridge. Carol Hodge, University of Michigan grad. Lillian, who's dead. Clyde's dead, William's dead, Terry's dead, Janine's living, Orlin's living, dead, and he's in the nursing home. You know, we started out with 25 people, and we ended up with 8 people. So we're happy to say that we were all in our 70s and 80s when we wrote this book, and now our book is in 27 states and 9 foreign countries. Wow. So we were late bloomers.
Okay, are there any questions? I hope that you notice some of the overlap and connections between the events, and they were presented in different formats, but I think the presentation worked really well, and Mr. Jones, you'd have to elaborate on some of the things that Professor Goldberg introduced in his presentation, also in Suite, and the Sojourner Truth situation, which Dudley Randall also talked about. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the relationship of Krantz Woods and, because when I was a little boy, my aunt stayed on Justine and Stockton, and we called that corner garden, but I found out later they called it Krantz Woods.
Okay, this is what happened. What's your name?
Oscar.
Oscar, this is what happened. White real estate men say, oh, you want to buy a house in Corner Garden? We were known as the Colored Grosse Pointe back then. So anyway, the white real estate men say, oh, you want to buy a house in the Corner Garden area, you want to buy a house in Corner Garden. And there are people today who live in Krantz Woods, Oliver, who still think they live in Corner Garden. I don't make any big thing about it because they bought more books than the people in Corner Garden bought. I don't make any bones about it. There's a Seventh-day Adventist church that's on Joseph Campo, right there at Conant Avenue. And then when they opened up the church, they named it in big letters, Seventh-day Adventist Church of Kona Gardens. And my cousin said, I'm going to, I said, don't tell them people a damn thing. They banned books. They ain't no big thing. It ain't no big thing. Now that I'm the president of the association, everybody's welcome. The guy's telling me, he said, Jones, he said, you know, you were director, you were the president of the 50th anniversary and the 60th anniversary of Persian High School, and you didn't say anything about friends of Persian High School. I said, well, you didn't go to Persian. Well, I'm going to get 100. I said, well, look, man, you're a friend. You come on. You're a friend of Persian High School, you donate. But that was a trick that they used. And then after the white real estate men did it, then the black real estate men did it. You'd be surprised at the number of people that think they live in Kona Gardens, but they don't. But it ain't no big thing, because Kona Gardens is not the pristine neighborhood it used to be. So it's no big thing with me that people will say, oh, you know, it makes you feel like a rock star. I was in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was in St. Louis, Missouri. I was getting ready to go up an arch. And this guy who was a maintenance worker there, he had his uniform on and had his name on there. And every time I turned, I was standing in line to go up an arch. And this guy kept looking. Every time I turned around, this guy was looking at me. So he walked over and he said, hey, man, I know you from Detroit. You went to Persian High School. What's your name? I said, Orlin Jones. And I said, what's your name? He said, Shed Collie. Well, I can't tell you what he said, what I said. I hadn't seen this guy in I don't know how many years. Now, there was Gerald Ford was a forest ranger. And there was a young black lady standing beside him that went all over the world. And guess what? That was Shed's daughter. I couldn't believe it. You know, I got so many stories. Everybody's got stories to tell about their neighborhood. And, you know, we got, there's an Alfred Billingsley that lives in Amsterdam, Holland, and there's a Donald Vaughn that lives in Germany, Stuttgart, Germany. Now, here's two guys, one's in the Army, one's in the Air Force, and they're both walking down the street in Amsterdam, Holland, and they run into each other. Now, what's the odds on that? You see what I'm talking about? All these fabulous stories come out of our neighborhood. We had a fellow that went to Persian High School by the name of John Barber. I wasn't able to show us. He graduated from Mohawk at the age of 19. He was tragically killed in a hit-and-run accident in New Haven, Connecticut. Sad stories, great stories to come out. They're not phony stories either. I think one of the reasons I'm so successful in doing this is because I tell the truth. You know, I'm telling my neighbor Melba, you know, when you interviewing people for books and things like this, you got to double check it. You know, because somebody, when they get 2 or 3 drinks in, they'll tell you anything. So then when they go and you print in the book, hey, John, what about this? Well, hey, man, this didn't happen. So everything, we went over this book 5 times, and we got 2 mistakes there. We spelled, how many of you know, remember Claudia House Markham, Circuit Court Judge? Okay, when we went over there, she called me at 3 o'clock in the morning. Orlin, you spelled my damn name with a small H. You know what I mean? Claudia House Markham. Now I said, I can't believe that after we went over that book 5 times. You know. But anyway, if the Lord willing, the will don't run dry, I'm going to come out with a slide presentation like this of all the neighborhood theaters in the city of Detroit. How many even know there were over 200 neighborhood theaters in the city of Detroit, excluding the downtown ones? So it's just I don't call myself a historian of Detroit because you get too many arguments. I call myself a historian of Kona Gardens and Persian High School. Thank you, I appreciate it.
We've got a lot of questions and a lot of comments, but some of you have to catch the bus. And but I want to thank our presenters today. And when we return next week, or you can go on C-Tools and post your reactions or comments. Students who are here, and the rest of you, and certainly there's some flyers here to buy the book. And we want to make just a couple more comments before you leave about next week.
Thank you all for coming out. And I think you're going to hear stories here you don't hear elsewhere. You're going to honor histories from neighborhoods and people and eras that are not brought in the media. The arc is really historical, so we're going to kind of keep pushing the story forward. Next week is going to be themed on failed urbanism and failed regionalism. We'll try to take some of the policy issues now and try to say what happened to the city in terms of efforts to have successful regionalism or urbanism, and how that reflects on issues of regionalism. But we're also going to keep individual stories there. So one of the women we'll have will be one of the plaintiffs. If people know the Garrett versus Hamtramck case, which was about the lining of I-75 and Judge Keith's opinion that is still ongoing after 40 years, trying to actually get real justice and get people back in their homes that they were removed in urban. And you'll hear her story from a very personal perspective. We'll talk about what it means to sort of have this breakdown in the region and the sort of city and suburban relationships, particularly under the era of Coleman Young. And how that has set up some of the issues we're facing today. So we'll also have a woman talking about contemporary issues of trying to get Regional Transportation Authority approved this coming fall in terms of ballot initiatives in the Tri-County area. So the story continues. We really appreciate you coming out. We're going to be continuing on this in terms of history, and we're going to bring it up to present day and look at a number of contemporary issues. So thanks for coming out.
Just one more thing, before you leave, we're handing out, for those of you who live in the Detroit area and may have interest, on February 25th, we are having an anniversary event for the Department of African American Studies at Wayne State University. And so we would like for you to come out. We're going to have speakers who participated in the first demonstration, 69, 70, and then also later when it was a department. So please, if you have the time, come out on the 25th, 3 to 7 in the Partridge Law School. We're being hosted by the Damon Keefe Center, and I think you'll find that also equally informative and exciting, and we will feed you.
One more quick thing. I don't know if this was mentioned at the beginning, but there is a website too, for those of you not on C-Tools. We keep saying C-Tools, that's a course tools program in Ann Arbor for students, but the semesterindetroit.com website has readings for these gatherings too. They're all publicly posted, so we'll put them on Facebook too. If you're not on our Facebook page, we'll do that. But just so you know, those readings are out there as well for everybody. They're not just intended for the university students paying tuition. But thank you again for coming.
Okay, thank you. And we'll see you next Thursday night.